afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Dorset Historical Society for our third Thursday lunchtime lecture. And today we have a special treat with our speaker, Andy Longacre, who will be talking about the Dorset Church's response to the COVID pandemic. I think some of you might be old enough to remember way back to 2020 to 2023. But it's also interesting to talk about what actually happened during that period, because Andy beforehand had reminded me about the one-way aisles in the grocery stores and the arrows on the floor. I had completely forgotten about that. So that's why this is important. And I'll shut up and let Andy talk. And y'all, thank you.
I really appreciate everyone who's come. You're all part of today's talk, because as I say something like mask, you know.
Yeah, I have.
And I said, you have a reaction. You know what I mean? We all went through this. There's a story about this mask, and my wife is going to just tell us a little bit about it. Okay, I'll tell you about it, and she can jump in. But, very early in the pandemic, a lot of seamstresses in the town learned how to make masks. There weren't a lot of them in the stores. Supply chain. Is that a word you thought about much before the pandemic? Toilet paper and masks, But every seamstress worth her salt has plenty of scrap material. And you could get a pattern online. The critical element is that little piece of elastic. They sold out. They sold out everywhere. The supply chain. So I went on Amazon, found a 1,000-foot roll of this, and ordered it 1,000 feet, because you couldn't make the mask without the elastic. Okay? So we learned about not just supply chain, we learned about Amazon. And you think of the things that sort of came up in importance. So that's as we go through this, and I say a word. Think about, was that word in my vocabulary 3 years ago? I'll say pod, and you might think of what pod means now and what it might have meant then, or Zoom. So I mean, it's been fascinating to me to go through this. Early January, I tripped over this picture that I had taken early in the pandemic of Dorset Church's attempt to have an outdoor tent worship with a tent that was falling down. Other churches had much more successfully. But I said, that reminds me, And so we'll come back to this one, because that's not really the beginning of the COVID experience for me. Let me see. Has it gone forward? No. I don't really know how to advance this. Here.
What
What?
happens if you press the space bar?
Space bar.
You know what the space bar is?
It didn't go.
Okay, hold on.
There
There you go.
we go. Okay, there we go.
Okay,
there we have.
11, 2020.
March 11th, 2020. Ginny and I had driven down to Hilton Head to visit some friends, and we were planning to go on to Atlanta to visit our grandchildren and all that. And you can tell it's Hilton Head because there's a nice lighthouse in the left-hand picture, and there's Ginny lining up a punt, which undoubtedly she sank. But as we were driving down, we got a message from our daughter. Grandparents' Day has been canceled. And then another one, the high school soccer game has been canceled. And then that night we heard that the NBA had suspended its season. And we looked at each other, this is serious. Yeah. This was the day where we, instead of driving to Atlanta, we turned the car north and we came right back to Dorset. Well, what's happening in Dorset? We found out that the church had been closed, or was being closed, and they put together video worships. This is the first one. It was on March 22nd. The building is closed, but the church is not. We could go to YouTube on Sunday morning, and they had put together a worship service on YouTube. So it opened with our music director, Tom Salmon, playing some music. Our pastor, Jim Gray, gave us a welcome. Jane LaBruno, the administrator, read some of the readings. And although he wasn't on this very first broadcast, Reverend Skip Dickinson has been filling in and started to fill in with the prayers. And the sermon was filmed, and pictures of the windows were filmed, and this was all glued together. But notice, none of these people are in this church with anybody else, just the cameraman and doing their part. Thursdays and Fridays became filming days. They would film their part, and then the engineer would take over. And Sunday morning, there would be a service. Let me see if I get them. Soon everything became virtual. You know, even the congregation became virtual. This was Judy and me taped onto the. I'm over in the bass section. She's over here, actually right there in the alto section. People were placed about where they usually sat, and so when those things were being filmed, I showed you, they could look out in the church and sort of feel that we're giving a church service. Oh, and when there was a children's lesson, the Sunday schoolers were there too. Everybody became versed in Zoom. Oh, the screen time, I hate to think of it. But that was actually our annual meeting, and the number of people expressing themselves. Oh, Henry, you're there, right in the middle. I guess that's probably, oh, Jenny's here, of course, up in the upper left corner. But that became our meeting space. What about our collection plate? Well, this became our collection plate. A drop box on the outside, on the office door, where people could bring their envelopes during the week and drop them off, or they could mail them in. But you know, we had to adapt in many ways. I think this is the funniest one. I want you to read it. That the summer bake sale, late June that year, became a fantasy sale. We ask you to add up the cost of what you would normally spend to bake. There's nothing to buy. But we ask that you add up what you normally purchase. And then we ask what you would normally pay for something at the bake sale. And take those two total and give it to the fellowship so they can do their mission. Ginny will tell you that was the largest amount of money we ever made on a bake sale. There was one very generous person who probably virtually bought 1,000 brownies. I don't know, but this is how we tried to keep things going in sort of a normal way. Oh yes, April. This is Easter. The Thursday before Easter, we have a Tenebrae service, and so 13 candles are lined up. Usually there are 13 deacons and stuff, but there were just two. Jim, the pastor, and his wife. They're a pod, so they can both be in the church at the same time. This is early in the COVID. And there would be a reading here, and they would douse a candle. And then a reading on the other side, and douse a candle. Then there would be 13 readings. Well, having been warned, they encouraged us to put together 13 candles. And here I have what's left of them. This is a picture taken in our living room of 13 candles and a damper, and sitting right up there is my iPad, and this is the screen shot that came through YouTube that Thursday night, and we participated. And what we found is that this was once a year, but for communion services, they would warn us, and we'd have 2 cups of juice and bread, and we would do it at home with the person on the screen. Everything was virtual. What a word. Okay. Oh, world, an hour, half an hour later, starting to wonder, when is this going to end? when can we go back to church? Worldwide Communion Sunday, we have people recite the Lord's Prayer in different languages. And what you can see is each person filmed their own with an iPhone, mailed it in, it got folded into the service, and we heard it thus in, I think Michelle in French might have been in France at that point. In any case, it looks like it. And we have people who can speak Russian and Flemish and such. And then at the end of the service, we have a breaking of the bread and a drinking of the wine. And once again, we were prepared with pieces of bread and pieces of wine at home as we watched this service. In early October, we finally caught up with other churches in town, decided to put up a tent. It's a rather flimsy tent. I hate to say it, but some of the activities. This is the quilting group, all maxed up, starting to sew a quilt. But unfortunately, within a couple weeks, it got too cold for this. And here we are back at that picture in early October. This was the second of two services we pulled off. There's the choir master over on the right with his euphonium, so he could play for the singing. People brought their, it was a nice October day, but things turned too cold. And you can see we had a sprinkling of people, and the minister's back under the tent. But that was the sort of the end of outdoor weather. And we went back to strictly virtual. Tom Salmon, the director of music, started offering Thursday night hymn sings. We would be emailed sheets of songs that he was going to sing, 10 of them or so, and then he'd play, and we'd try to sing along with him. This is all, and Jim, Pastor Jim, started to have Wednesday night weekly fireside chats. Make announcements, have a small homily, and prayers. But this is how we survived as a congregation in that first year. Oh yeah, on Christmas Eve itself, instead of a Christmas pageant, they decided to try to do a living creche, drive-by. And one family, one pod, was in the creche. That was the Emery family. And we would drive by. They had someone, I don't know where they got the donkey, but they did have a donkey. And we drove by twice, right, Jenny?
Yes, we did.
It was a nasty night in terms of the weather. Something else started. This isn't directly pandemic, but even though we were not yet meeting in church, there had been a plan afoot for several years to expand the church, especially the back part, which is the more modern part of the church, the office space of the back wing, add a second story to it, and most importantly, to put an elevator or a lift in there so that you could get lifted up to the sanctuary level or the second story or down to the vestry, which is below ground, and not have to go upstairs. There had been a couple of lifts that weren't terribly effective, and a study maybe 5 years before we even started this showed that handicap access and meeting spaces were the main shortcomings. So the pandemic didn't stop us. So we decided to keep moving ahead. We got plans, and we'll see. It just added some complication. After all, we weren't using the sanctuary, we might as well build it. I mean, how crazy can you be? Spring of 2021. You remember this? It's lining up to get your COVID shots. I think that's Burr and Burton Gymnasium. It's amazing the places that they enable to get you to get the shots. And Ginny got a picture of me wearing a mask, of course, getting a shot. Oh, I'm sorry. Does it go back? No, it doesn't go back. Okay, here we go. How about this? In February, thinking about how when we would like to have outdoor services if we could, when the weather allowed, we found this nice little hay wagon available for sale. After all, farmers don't really bale hay anymore, they roll it. And so there are a lot of idle, retired hay wagons in the world. It wasn't very expensive, and sure enough, we purchased it for, I think, $800, and put some very hardy craftsmen from the congregation at work, taking off one side, putting on a new floor, adding a roof to it, making a superstructure. That's Brian Emery, the fellow who had been Joseph in the earlier picture, and Bob Mazzaros, two other people, Phil Peterson and Patrick McGuire, helped a lot. They all were sort of carpenters, either professionally or and they did a great job. And so we had this, in April, we had this mobile altar, if you would, ready, and we chose May 2nd to be the day that we would start having outdoor services. April 4th, Ginny and I actually visited another church that was starting to allow congregations to come in. And this is what we saw, that they blocked off parts of each pew so that there would be a separation, social distancing, so they could come in. And they had an overflow room. This space reserved for angels. So that's where you weren't supposed to sit. So we came back to Dorset and said, okay, how many can we fit in our sanctuary if we do something like this? And so these, instead of being, spread out, they were moved together, either couples, what we call pods, or singles, and we found that we could get maybe 60 people. Our usual attendance is, before pandemic, was about 110. So it would be a start, and then we'd have to open up downstairs expansion. But at least we looked at that, and people, that was sort of what we planned. May 2nd, oh my. By the time May 2nd rolled around, where we were going to use that hay wagon, we felt, and the governmental advice was that we could, in fact, have a service in the sanctuary. Not too many people were ready to come. I wasn't. I didn't have it. There was no choir. But you see, the spacing was using, those are the signs we used to say, don't sit here, sit there instead. And you can see they were spaced out. And, I'm told there were 40 to 50 people there, but there must be a lot under the balcony if that's the case. But that's about how many came back to church. And then it got a little better each week. There was a pickup choir for a while. I don't know. 2 weeks later, we finally got around to blessing the hay wagon. People had been in church, they came out, and it was blessed. As it was, it never got used for a church service. It did get used for a concert or two, but as a performance stage. But we were beat by the opening of the sanctuary, and we wanted to stay with that. Okay, August of that second year. We're going to start to do that building project I talked about. It took quite a while to get it approved, permitted, and even to raise the money, thank goodness, to do it. So we took part of the hay wagon and built what I call the pandemic cross from some of the old oak wood that was part of it. And the marble stand came from the church itself, where there had been a little bit of work on it. And that sat in a temporary office space on Meadow Lane for about a year, a little over a year, while the construction was done. And our so-and-sos, the quilting group, also set up in that temporary space, and kept working, starting working again, is that fair to say, Jenny? On the quilt that never got sold the summer before, never got finished because of the pandemic, and started to put it together. There they are masked up, working on the quilt. In October, finally, construction started, and there had been a roof there. They took it off. They found a bit of rotten wood in places, and there's a big hole here for the elevator that went in. That's fascinating. The plan was that this window, which is in the back of the church, not actually in the sanctuary, but one of the back rooms, could be taken out and turned into a doorway right at the level. You see, the church level is up here, and the vestry or the cellar is down here, and so we would have a elevator, a lift, whatever, that you could walk in at ground level, get in, and be taken up to the church, taken down to or taken up to the second story that we were adding. But anyway, that got started. The office had been moved to Meadow Lane. Nonetheless, church services, we were in the church now. Went on pretty normally. Christmas Eve, we had a lighting of the Christ candle and a family. I don't know, I'm not sure which family that is, who lit the Christ candle. We're here. And then come Easter of yet the next year. Now we're 2 years from when it started. It started in March of 2020. Pretty normal, pretty full congregation. We have a black shroud that on Good Friday is drawn up to block the window and the cross. And here it's being lowered. I bet you're glorying in it, Henry.
That's me.
And here's Tom with his euphonium leading the music. There was, by that point, there was a pretty good choir and pretty good attendance. It was nearly full. We were heading back. May 1st, finally the building was ready for occupancy. It was finished on the inside. It was empty. We got some comments that, boy, this feels like a schoolroom or something, and because we hadn't brought the furniture in and we hadn't fully decorated it. But I'll just show you. Here's that door we made out of the window. And the window itself, the 110-year-old window, was installed in the back of the installation. So that as you come in at the church from the parking lot, you know it's a church building. You can't see, unfortunately, the rose windows anymore because it's blocked. But we did save the old window, and this is just a marvelous place. Church is open 24 hours a day, so 365 days a year. You can always go in. Right now the front door is closed, but you can always go in the side door and up into the sanctuary and see. This to me is a magical spot where you can walk right out of church, and there's a nice wide stairway, or there's an elevator that you can take up or down to another part of the building. So we spent the summer refurnishing it, that is bringing in furniture that we had stored, and also then adding things like sets of chairs, the two windows as you see. This multi-purpose room, this upper room, we call it the upper room now. So there's lots of purposes. Small presentations, like something like this. Choir practice up there, because it's right out of the choir. Even a small chapel if someone wants an intimate wedding or something like that, it can be used for it. And there's that pandemic cross I told you. We brought it in, made out of the hay wagon. Downstairs in the Sunday school room, we've done a lot to spiff it up as well and put in new murals for the kids to have for Sunday school. It's really quite an amazing building. Oh, look at that. And the quilters use that room too. not needing masks now, but working on the next quilt. Working on right now. And so finally Rally Day, September 18th of last year, but we really got back as a full church for the first time. I mean, well, we've been working that way, but a nearly full congregation, a nearly full choir, and the Sunday school class just blew us all away. We would typically have 4 or 5, maybe 6 Sunday schoolers on a Sunday. There were 14 there, and many of them have stayed. There's a life going on in this church now, partly because of the new building, but that was very exciting to all of us. So, if you haven't been in the church lately, you ought to take a tour of it. Jane will show you around. And on Sundays, we're open too. I will say right now the front door is being worked on. And you have to come in the side door, but it's there already.
I wanted to say something about funerals, because during the time it was closed down, Bob's sister, who was at Equinox Village Terrace for years, died. And there's no way that our children and other nieces and nephews could have come from, because they're all over the country. But we had a Zoom funeral, and it was just lovely. I mean, Jim participated, and we had, I think we had signed up for an hour or something, but the kids they were all cousins. They all kept talking to each other from all over. They hadn't seen each other in a long time. It was better than it would have been in person, because they couldn't have come.
Yes, there's no doubt.
So that was a very successful.
All of our families learned about using Zoom.
Yeah.
I think of the annual meeting that we had, and where there were probably 60, 70 people in, and it went like an annual meeting typically does, you know. It went on. Finally, we were done. We signed up. We closed the meeting, and then as people left, they were doing this. Their TV said people were waving to each other because we hadn't been together in so long, and yet Zoom brought us together.
But it was also extraordinary participation that even included Hal and Judy Miller, who had been the pastor before Jim Graham.
So he could go. I mean, Zoom does things for us, and we still use it some. But that was all something that came to us. Any more reactions? Yes.
When the video services were being recorded, did I understand correctly that each person was in the church? So Jim was in the church by himself, not with Tom or Jane?
Yes, most of the time. Jim did
and
it on Fridays.
Videotaped separately.
Jane did it on Thursday nights. I mean, there was almost a schedule, so they planned who would do what.
Yeah.
But at least early on, there was no one else there.
Just so they would not endanger each other.
Right.
Yeah, although they were in the offices. Oh, I didn't point out there, but maybe in the last picture, if I can just go back one. Over here is a filter. One of the things we recognized early as places were opening up schools, that you had to filter the air if you could and improve the ventilation. That was the magic thing. And so there are very few windows you can open in that church. So we bought some air sterilizers. They included a UV sterilizing unit as well as normal filters, and then accompanied them with fans that would draw air and fill the sanctuary. There were 5 filters, 2 downstairs and 3 upstairs. So that was an investment that we made to try to, you're trying to prevent something you can't see, you can't taste, you can't touch. I mean, and that, as I say, early on it was deadly earnest. No, I'm serious about that. I don't like thinking that I'm an at-risk person, but that was driven home to me. All of my little medical things.
Over what? Over 70? What did they say for age? Over 50?
60, yeah, 50, yeah, but then I'm a diabetic and, you know, other things, and all the things that could be wrong, you know, were risk factors. So we were just as careful. Thank goodness. Remember the word super spreader? we didn't want the church to become a super spreader. And go ahead.
Debbie and I are members of the First Congregational Church in Manchester, but we went through a lot of this same type of thing. The one thing that we did that sort of resonated with me, we started a morning prayers Monday, Wednesday, and Friday by Zoom. We'd never done that. And so you Zoom in and it's 30 minutes or thereabouts, and we've continued it. And it's been a progressive or a wonderful type of thing that we would have never done it had not been for the pandemic.
Was it just Mondays? Mondays at 9 or something?
Yeah.
Okay. We're taking notes.
Yeah. Okay.
The other thing is, you didn't have to go to church at church time. We often would go to church at dinner and have a real drink or a glass of real wine.
I miss Sunday mornings. To me, I was glad for a while. Actually, either by YouTube or by now in live services, Sunday morning is still our time. Ginny.
Well, I just wanted to follow up on Henry's realization that there was a lot that went into those YouTube Sunday services because each one was filmed separately, then had to be pasted in the right order according to the program. It was a.
You can go to the church website and find every one of those services still recorded. I showed you the first, the screens at the very first service, and I took those right off the YouTube.
Andy, one other thing. When we first started going to church, you had to wear a mask and separate. And for us old folks, you wear reading glasses, hearing aids, and a mask all around your ears. Every time I move something, things go falling off my face. I'm constantly confused.
Well, let me turn this off because we have two presentations. One by Erica, our library manager, whatever it is, and then one by John of what these organizations went through during the pandemic. John first.
Erica wants me to go first, so I'm going to go first, which is actually second because I'm here in line. So I'll be very brief. In March of 2020, everything closed down, so we closed down as well. We got to a schedule where the office manager would come in 1 day a week, and I would come in 1 day a week, and we would never see each other. And I was doing a lot of work from home. One of the exhibits that was scheduled to open in June of 2020 was about the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. And what I had found out was I thought before I got into the research that maybe a handful of women registered to vote in November 2020, and I just do profiles on that handful. Well, once I got into it, I found out that they all registered to vote. Not all, but about 200 women in Dorset voted in the first elections.
1920, right?
In 1920, yes.
More than vote today.
Possibly, yes.
What's the number?
Yeah.
About 200.
More than vote today?
I don't know.
At town meeting, though, more than we're at town meeting.
That's right.
And so the exhibit was going to be in the upstairs hallway. It ended up in this room here, where we have the general store exhibit now, with profiles of all 200 women. Who were they? You know, where did they live? What was their socioeconomic status? And in doing all of that, I found out that no one area in Dorset was favored. all 6 villages had women, and in the more rural areas had women registered to vote. And you had people like Zephine Humphrey, who was a nationally recognized author of registering to vote, and you had women who had no money, coughing up the poll tax and voting. So that was very impressive.
Question.
Yeah,
What are the 6 villages?
in Dorset?
Yeah.
Do you need me to tell you the 6 villages in
Yes,
Dorset?
I do.
Okay. North Dorset,
Yeah,
East Dorset,
East Dorset.
South Village,
Yeah, yeah.
South Dorset,
Oh,
Dorset Village, and obviously East Rupert.
Oh, obviously.
Because a third of East Rupert is actually Dorset. Yeah. And proudly so.
I guess that lets me in. Huh?
Yes, yes. And so we were totally closed to anyone wanting to come in for the exhibits or for anything. The third Thursday lunchtime lectures were closed down, although we're able to do one later on Zoom. Linda Radke, who is a singer who is doing songs of the suffragette movement, and that was wonderful, and that's still available on our YouTube channel. And if you think that might be nice to see on YouTube, which it would be even better live. And she'll be at the Manchester Community Library this Saturday at 2 o'clock. So, just as
Saturday at
yeah,
2 o'clock?
Yeah.
Oh.
It's a quick advertisement. Doing her songs of the suffragette movement. I think that's what the program is. She'll be there. And so we closed totally until the beginning of July, when we were allowed to reopen. We reopened, but very hesitantly. I would be here doing research and putting up exhibits, which had, of course, been delayed. And we would allow researchers in by appointment. And a few took us up on the offer during the summer. And slowly but surely we reopened more and more, and people would come back. A lot of people came back were back in the late summer and fall of 2022, but then with COVID still spreading, less people have been coming now. And one great thing that came up were the professional organizational Zooms. The Vermont Curators Group had been planning for a long time to do a statewide series of interconnected exhibits called Vision 2020. It was broadly about technology. And that got shut down because, we were all closed. And we had Vermont Curator Group Zooms with people from all over the state, and even out of the state, talking about what they were doing in response to COVID, other than just closing down. And there were some interesting conversations. There was one presentation one day by 2 young women at Middlebury College Museum of Art who were doing as much as they could to create virtual exhibits during that time. And so that was a really interesting thing to see. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there was a local historical society that in the spring, like I want to say May of 2020, was having a large unmasked gathering. But they knew COVID was going on, which is kind of surprising that they actually knew that, because it was going to be unmasked. They were only going to let a few people in the Historical Society at a time. But they said that they had a problem with a previous event, that they wanted to be able to do contact tracing, but some of the people going into this unmasked event refused to sign in to say who they were in case they needed to be contacted. And everyone else around the state was like, "What are you doing? No!" But people were responding in different ways, and it was important to see how that happened. And then the New England Museum Alliance also had several Zoom, so we got to learn about what we were doing around the state, how we were utilizing volunteers during that time, things like that. So things kept open, but in different ways, and that was very helpful. Now, of course, this is ancient history, but in the beginning of March 2023, first weekend, the Dorset players were supposed to do their one-act plays, but I think 4 or 5 of the people involved with it got COVID, and so it was postponed for a week. So it's still affecting what we do and all that. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica unless there are questions. Erica, come on up.
Hello, everybody. I'm Erica. I'm the director at the Dorset Library. And, and Andy told me, asked me if I would talk about this. I started thinking back because it does seem like it's ancient history. There's so much thought and effort went into it while it was happening, but it's like almost like that whole year and a half, 2 years is just gone. It's crazy how fast it seemed to go. But I remember when it started, they started talking about it in libraries, were talking about closing, and we said, okay, fine, we'll close for 2 weeks. And we used that time to, the staff, we were still working together and coming in, and we, worked on painting projects and doing things that you couldn't do when the public was in the building. And then, it just kept getting extended, and we were only closed for about 1 to 2 months. I can't remember exactly how long it was, totally closed. And then we had people knocking on our door because they want their books, so we started, through guidance of the CDC, the state library started offering the curbside service. So we had it set, we had a whole system, we had to create all of our policies in the system to have people call us or email us, and we prepare and put in little packages, and we had a cart on the front porch where we put your books and you come pick them up, and it was that we did that for about, try to remember, I'm not good at it, like I said, this whole time period sort of disappeared from my mind. That was spring through fall, and then we started offering appointments because people really were knocking on the door trying to get into the library. So we started scheduling very specific time periods when you could come in to either use the computer, because people still needed, we have people that need the internet access, or, use the computers that we have. So we have like short browsing periods, short computer use periods. And then eventually, not too much longer after that, we started opening up a little, free for all, certain chunks of time, but we also left ourselves a lot of chances to, we had to clean. There's a lot of cleaning. We did the same thing with the air filters, wiping down surfaces. Now we still do this. We still wipe off the books because you wouldn't believe how much grime is on the books. Come back. So that's something that ties going forward, just COVID or not, it's nice to keep our, wiping down books and keeping everything clean. Our programs we did not have a lot of, we're more in person. We did not have a lot of luck. We tried a couple of virtual programs. We tried to have the book club meet, that there were technical difficulties with that. So sooner than later we started meeting again in person, but we tried to keep everything outside. And to this day we still do most of our programs, if we can, outside. We've been having more in the building, over winter, because we're not 100% back to our full swing of programs, but we're getting there. The biggest thing that affected us is, we have a huge haunted house every fall. It's our thing. We do this, if hundreds of people come through, and John, a couple of us in town helped coordinate a drive-through, kind of like the drive-by activity. We had coordinated it so people came in around Meadow Lane and drove around, and all of the, residents and organizations had their tents, and we handed out candy. And the library, I don't know if this is probably, it was kind of funny. We were the plague doctors, so we all wore the plague masks. But that was, then it's kind of shaped our haunted house going forward. Last year we did it outside. Last 2 years we did it outside. We also received a lot of funding through the state and the federal government for giving us money to do things like buy these. We have these whole collection of tents now, so that we could continue to do our services outside. So we do that outside now. We've got a lot of our kids programs over summer we tried to do outside just to be a little safe, but we got back to normal pretty quickly because you know, I think it was a year and a half about, because it was July, summer of 2021 when we just opened up. You know, we still had the mask mandates per the state guidelines, but eventually that dropped off. And now we're back to normal. We still have a stock of cleaning supplies and disinfectants in the basement just in case, but it was interesting, and it went fast. And I feel bad because my assistant director was hired a week before we shut down, so it took him a while, and he still hasn't seen us in 100% full swing yet, but like I said, we're getting there. It's an interesting time, and you know, and you said, you know, I totally forgot about the vaccination bit of it. We were down in Bennington getting ours, and it was the first time that I was sitting there looking at all the people and the way they had it set up, and said, we're making history right now. You know, it's not something that you really, you know, when you're going through it, you're not thinking that it's a historical event, but we might be in the textbooks going forward. Andy?
There were many times we lived in Vermont. I was happy that we lived in Vermont. A lot of open air, and you could do things outside. Of course, you know, I worked at the cemetery. I had no trouble with social distancing in the cemetery. But we all know people. My son-in-law's mother, anyway, who did get COVID and who died of it. You know, people who unfortunately lived in cities were much more prone. And so it did touch us, but not in this community, not very much. And we were lucky.
Yes, and that's it. You know, it was hard. My sister lives in Salem, Massachusetts, where it was like out of control for a while. And you know, it almost felt like it wasn't happening here because we are sort of in a bubble. But slowly but surely, little tendrils would leak in, and we just had our. I still haven't had it, thank goodness, but we had our first case of it at the library in January this year of one of the staff members. You know, it took us that long to actually get it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
So thank you all for coming. You can continue conversations over maple cream cookies that Andy brought. They're his signature treat. And you can come back next month for the third Thursday lunchtime lecture where Andy Schweinitz will be telling us tales of her roots in Dorset and her family connections to Dorset.